How you doing? Uh, as usual, I want to check to make sure my sound's okay and the video's working. How you doing, Brian? Got to get fully awake here. Hey, Alex, how you doing, neighbor? We got some good weather for today and tomorrow morning. After that, look out. Hi, Dom. Oh, good. Hi, Patel. Merry Christmas to you too. We'll sort of hang out. Let me ask you this while we're waiting. Um, Hi, Thomas. While we're waiting, we talk about? I see sort of like a how you go about finding stuff. Let me talk a little about my own sort of, if you want to call it method, if you will. Um, my original background, I should say, when I was when I was in college, I majored in field biology, and then the difference between field biology, I guess, and I don't know what the other one, lab biology or whatever they called it, but field biology basically we'd be out in the field and we'd find different kinds of things that would, make up whatever biological topic we had at the time. Later on, I moved over to sociology and was, again, a lot of the things from field biology applied to sociology. And one of the areas that to me was the most interesting in both field biology as well as sociology, and I suppose to some extent criminology is really more of a sociologist looking at crime than a criminology. I like to sort of characterize my career as a faux criminologist. But was the whole point of research was like you find something and then you hook it up to something else and you connect it to something else. And one of the early, in fact, it was my dissertation, one of the early types of research I did was on detectives. I was in fact, I did a book on it on sort of detective uh, how they went about solving cases. Um, the easiest ones, really, in some respects, were homicides because it was usually somebody whoever got the family gun first and knocked off somebody else. Later on in my um, crazy career, I spent about 12 years studying gangs in mostly in San Diego, California, and later on in a little in El Paso, Texas. I had a grant. I spent a lot of time with a gang called what they called. I think it was a Calle Santa Fe. I think I'm not sure about the Calle part, but I remember Santa Fe, and I used to know all of their signs and so forth. But the the point was that you'd see something and you'd want to make sense out of it. This happened, and I noticed that there were a lot of things that they did in real detectives did as well as Sherlock Holmes. I read all of Sherlock Holmes. Is to find what they called unobtrusive measures, and unobtrusive measures were things that you'd see one thing that would be like a fingerprint. There's a good example. Back then, they didn't have DNA. there, there were a lot of a lot of homicides with stone axes and things like that. But I applied that to sociology, and one of the strange pieces of research I was involved in was pinball players. And I was wondering, I didn't at the time when I started, I didn't know a thing about pinball, and I was told to go find out something you don't know anything about. And so I started looking at watching these pinball players, and I noticed that to try to figure out, well, which one is the most popular. And there was some tile that was wore underneath. The more popular ones had more tile wear than the ones that weren't as popular. Little things like that, and started watching. And in order to do that, I was a graduate student, and I didn't have any money. I didn't have very much, but I got pretty good at pinball, so I kept winning free games. And then I noticed that I would come in to go play, and I noticed some of the pinball machines had free games up there. And what I found out later was that it was almost a contempt that some really good pinball players had said, this is nothing. I defeated it. In fact, I'll just leave some free games on there. Like I said, being a poor graduate student, I would I would go to that. And finally, yeah, I learned a thing or two about playing pinball while I was at it. If anybody would be interested in a friendly game, let me know. I'd enjoy it. A little side bet, nothing much. Anyhow, so most of my academic career has been involved in different kinds of research. Most of it has been crime related, but other kinds of things like pinball. I once did a research on a retirement home and some things like that. But in looking at watches, is that the same thing? Finding something that was I could afford, and to me had a lot of worth to it. Now, let me say something else about that. The yesterday, I think it was, that we were talking about, somebody had made a comment about, oh, the FP's yarn is the price has gone down, and and nobody likes them anymore, and so forth. Well, it turned out to be the price going down. I found out, at least with mine, was about 250% more than what I paid for it. And then somebody comes in and they get all, people who come to those things, say, oh, well, you guys don't know what you're talking about. And he goes on about some economic theory. I realized that really economics, if this were money, we'd keep the money instead of buy watches with them. So there's some other value in the watch that the money inherently doesn't have itself. And so I was sort of trying to figure all of these things out, so to pull it all together. And so, and looking at watches, you find out what I'll call sort of serendipitous knowledge. You find out some little thing. And let me give you an example. I've been involved with different Swiss watch companies on different kinds of things. And on one, I've always been very interested in what goes into it. Okay. So you have like who made the movement, who made the hairspring, who made this, who made that. And this one thing I came up, and I always figured that the reason that I wasn't given full information was that they were hiding something, some cheap stuff that they bought, God knows where, and put it in their watches. Well, I found out that that wasn't necessarily true. What I found out is sometimes they're quiet about it. I'm not talking about the movements. If somebody puts in a cheap movement, they don't mention the movement. You can pretty well guess it's not a terrible movement. Movements like Solita used to be ETA, but now it's Solita. Solita has sort of become sort of a standard that ETA once was, but then they stopped selling them. So you have this, and so if you see a Solita in a watch, at least as far as to what to me is valuable, that's not a valuable watch. If there's some other feature in the watch that I like, or some other module in the watch, well, that's different. I have my Dandy is worth something to me. for lots of reasons, but the base movement is an ETA. But on top of that is an Agonor movement that's always been amazing to me, and it's one of the patented parts by Jean-Marc Wiederrecht that's in this watch was a silly name. So the part of the research was bumping into that. And I think the important thing is noticing all kinds of details that when you bump into them, when you're looking at watches, you know the value one way or the other. Now, back to an earlier point I was making about thinking, well, they're not telling people what are in their watches because they're hiding something cheap. I found out, especially with some of the detail parts, that's not necessarily true. They're hiding it for a very different reason, and that's they're hiding it so the competition doesn't know. I know this one watch company, they make really fabulous watches, and if you take a close look at them, you can see why they're fabulous, but they're not going to tell you the possible competition where they get those kinds of parts, because the idea, I think we got a little carried away with in-house. But if we look at in-house movements are made by outhouse parts, okay? And is that a good or bad thing? Well, it depends on where they get them from. Now, you take, for example, a company that specializes in one part. Let's take, for example, the hands. You take a company like Fiedler, which is one of the oldest hand companies around. And if you dig around, I was looking at some Rolex, and they had Fiedler hands. Patek Philippe, which prides itself on doing everything. I get the Patek Philippe magazine, and there was an article in it. Well, it actually was in French, and I found it, and it was about Fiedler hands. Now, why would Patek Philippe magazine have this big article on how great and how wonderful and the history and everything else of Fiedler hands, unless maybe they're using them just like Rolex was? It was that they had like Rolexes somehow. These are for their Rolex group. So just noticing things you don't know whether will be useful or not. Let me give you an example from some detective. I was with these detectives, and they were out on an investigation. One of their men had been stabbed, and they were looking for the guy. And there had been a burglary that the police officer showed up and cornered the guy, and the police officer, pulled out his gun, and the guy pulled out a knife and attacked him, and the guy's gun jammed, and he got stabbed. And so the guy ran away, and they were trying to find him. And so they were looking at all of this stuff. They were trying to. The guy had taken some stuff from the house, and but he had ditched him. I mean, he left almost was like a trail of crumbs to where he was, because he didn't want to get caught with all this stuff. The police officer had already identified him. He stabbed him. That's pretty close. And so they were following, and they found this old, not old, but used milk carton. There's either a milk carton or a water carton or something like that. One of those big plastic things. And it was all ripped up. And so well, so what? I mean, the guy didn't break into a house and stab a police officer so he could get away with a milk carton. Why would that be interesting? Well, this one experienced detective said, he said the plastic from that milk carton could have been used to slip the lock. And I never thought of that. I thought, my God. And so there are a lot of things, the same thing in looking for a good watch. A little piece of knowledge becomes important because it tells you something about how the watch was made. One of the things when I got my watch back from service, my Chanel Monsieur, one of the things I learned, a piece of what I call random watch knowledge, was that Romain Gauthier had sort of this, he was considered sort of quirky in this respect. He wanted to make all of the parts himself. In other words, all of the parts that go into Romain Gauthier watches were made by the Atelier Romain Gauthier. Well, when I found that Romain Gauthier was involved in making the movement for Chanel, plus the fact, another little thing, that Chanel owns what they call a friendly interest in Romain Gauthier, I started looking at the parts. I don't know if you can see them or not. Let me bring them up here. These parts are not your standard parts. One of the big giveaways that it's Romain Gauthier is a circular bridge. And on the circular bridge, you can see all of the different movements. And so now, I can't afford one of these either, but I got a good deal on it. And it's, I did, all I knew about the price was that I couldn't afford it. Okay. Until I came across one and a bunch of things came together and I could. After it basically had to do with selling watches. But the point is that you have all of these little bits and pieces of knowledge, some that may not mean anything to you. I think the big mistake that some watch collectors make is the only thing that's important is the price. They were very upset about the fact that the FP Journe prices had come down. Well, they were crazy to begin with. I mean, they had, before the pandemic, they were, I think the base price was right around 20,000, which is by no means cheap. By the end of the pandemic, there weren't any available. And for some reason, I guess people had nothing better to do during it, and we didn't, than sort of look at watches and find out different values that were beyond the ones that they were normally looking for. And so when the price was really high, I think one of my watches was around $300,000. It's crazy. So why don't you sell it? Because I like the watch. The value was not ever in the amount. The amount simply was what I could afford, and it went way beyond what I could afford. Had nothing to do with it. The value, I mean, I'd keep all my money if it had nothing to do with the values. And so it's these kinds of things, I think, when I talk about the map to finding good watch prices, you have to find all of these little different things in there, and you do it. The research, this is another thing too. If research is considered research, like in a rough way, it's sort of like you get invited to go on a dig with a paleontologist, okay, and he's digging up dinosaurs someplace in Montana, and you go out with him, and all you see is, oh my God, this is digging through this dirt and stuff, and these stupid bones. What do I care? The paleontologist, especially the hobby paleontologist, is this is like great excitement. Look what I found. I found this, some kind of dinosaur, and is very excited about it. And you're thinking, meh, what? But this I think is another part of it, is that doing the research is really epiphenomenal to having fun. I mean, oh boy, I'm spending time watching watches. My wife comes in and says, it's bedtime. She says, oh, it's only, 3:30 in the morning. Just let me look at one more thing. That is where the research comes from. It doesn't come from, I'll pull some research book out and what should I do and so forth. But it comes, that's the idea of fun, and that's where the value is. And if you don't have those values, if you're just in it for the money, I don't know. I would go to the stock exchange or somewhere. Okay, so that's sort of the map is this little things, pay attention. Pay attention to as many little things as possible. I think, one of the big things that people make a big deal about is hacking or stop seconds. I'm not sure why that's important, and I know that it's important to some watchmakers. I prefer watches without stop seconds because I don't like the whole idea of this thing coming down on the balance wheel. Other people feel it's very important to set it. I don't know what they set it with, and then they can time it and so forth. I'm not saying that good timekeeping isn't important as an indicator of good horology, but rather there's a point that you have to remember is that the kind of watches and watch collections that we're involved in is sort of came out of the what was called the quartz crisis. Swiss watch companies almost got wiped out, and a lot of these big watch companies or ancient ones are now owned by groups like Richemont and Swatch. Not because they didn't make good watches, because it was like something happened during that period that they couldn't afford to make watches like they had before, and so they had to charge more for them in order to stay in business and make some additional value. And the additional value that they at least claim was craftsmanship. And so this is one thing. If we can find good craftsmanship in a watch, I know for a fact that Chanel didn't make this movement. It was made, it came from Roman Gauthier. And so it's an example is that, for God's sakes, who wants some perfume sniffers making a watch? Not me. Okay. They hired some really good watchmakers too. Okay, I have blabbed endlessly on this, so I'm going to check and see what some of the wisdom that you guys had and say hi to everybody. Hi, Nate Dog, Graham Grice, how are you? Let's see. Hi, Big Sal. Tim, it's 5:00 somewhere, Tim. Hi, Volsey. Let's see. Lee. Hi, Lee. Good grief. Oh, what's so funny about pinball? I'm a pinball wizard. Hey, Hater. Good to see you. Hey, Watch Monkey. Kino. Jerome de Marseille. Okay, let's see. Okay, Dominic's got something. He's always got good stuff. See, some watch manufacturers have to make general models that use off-the-shelf parts to save in-house skilled labor for higher end and cost. Good point. See, that's the kind of stuff. There's a guy who knows stuff. Hey, Goldfinger, how you doing? Thomas, I think one key to finding really great watches at really great prices is discover new independent brands that haven't become big yet. Also, great brands that are being resurrected. Exactly. Those are two really good ones. When Urban Jurgensen was sold to Caribou and Lannon, a bunch of them went, they were getting rid of the old stock. And uh, I and a rancher were fortunate enough to grab a couple of those, which were literally at close to half price of what they were, what the MSRP was. And so it was just sort of one of those big changes, or even a model change or an unpopular model. There's this one unpopular model I've had my eyes on for years. Unfortunately, it's still unpopular, and so it's still available. But you know, Thomas is right. That's a very good point. Hey, Lee, I was good with my home builder getting an expert to build my cabinets. So why would I care if XYZ Watch got an expert to build? I agree. Yeah, the same thing. If I have work done, we had a new portico put on front of our house. I'm not going to build a portico. When we first moved here about, God, it's been over 20, almost 25 years now, I built a couple sheds out in the back. And I got local wood and pounded them all together and used them for years. But my wife made me quit playing with my lawn tractor, so I haven't been able to use them too much. And so if I wanted to build something else, I'd have to go down and get someone to do it. Yeah, Dominic, you're probably right. But there's also, I don't know. It's just sort of the imagery of something coming down, go whap. You know, on one of my favorite watches, my Marco Lang Frederick II. You can, they have it nice and open so you can see it. And here comes the old stop. FP Jorn still doesn't use them in his, but like I said, you're probably right about that. Oh, Canadian Watch Monkey, that's a great point. Says we're having another quartz crisis, except this time it's with electric cars. Yeah, that's true. I think in a lot of ways, it's sort of the opposite with mechanical watches. One of the things that we're all warned against, where we're poisoning our environment, is the contents of batteries. We have a special place that we have to take our old batteries, and so that they can dispose of them. That's not going to, you know, pretty soon you got three-eyed fishes and coming up like you do in The Simpsons. But that's a good point. You have this big chain. The difference is that the mechanical watches, that's one way we can look at it, is like electrical cars. They're really an innovation. Hi, wear the mask. How you doing? Zipperman, how are you? Goldfinger, gotta run. Have a great day. Take care. Okay, let's see some of the other wisdom you guys have. Okay. Send an offer to pre-Christmas watch anticipation. Good luck. I hope you get it. Hey, by the way, too, I should not go near auctions. I really shouldn't. I it was I was they had a Mucha, Alphonse Mucha poster. It was, and I don't know. I have no idea what I bought. Well, they had, I don't know, how those online auctions are set up. So it was like, it's on. There was a Mucha on canvas. So oh my God, unless those guys are totally fraudulent, that thing would be a nice one to have because I like Mucha. Got a couple of his stuff here, and so I bid on it and won. And I got it for what, about $50 under what the low estimate was. And so, time they add on the quote premium and the way they decide to send it to me and everything, it'll probably cost me more than that. But that's another thing about finding great watches on auctions. Uh, you can. You got to be careful though, because you don't want to get into a bidding war. It's not good for you or the guy bidding against you, because you're both just jacking up the price. Know your prices before you go in there. Okay, let's hear some more wisdom from you. I yapped long enough. Oh, now you're quiet. Okay. All right. Um, anyway, you know, send an offer on pre-Christmas. Okay, that's great. Guys, I ate up my time. It's so I've got to go or I'll get in trouble. My 30 minutes. Um, Tim, give me some watches with Vasseur movements I should look at. I gave you a whole bunch of them, on Speak Marin, I think would be a good one to find that in. Benjamin Chi watches, he uses a higher end Vasseur. There are all kinds of them. Anyway, well, guys, we'll see you this afternoon. I sort of went on and didn't stop, but it's always, you know, I didn't leave you guys enough time. But thanks for the comments you had anyway, and thanks for putting up with me morning. One last thing from Thomas. Do you think that auctions are a way to find watches at great prices? I've got some decent buys off eBay, but have never tried real auctions. The thing about real auctions, well, first of all, the ones I've tried, the two kinds that I've tried. One is the one I just finished. They're these government recoverers that, they go on a raid they have a big bus and they raid the drug lords, and they come out and they end up with a bunch of Rolex watches with diamonds and all kinds of bling on them. And I think that, and some other kinds of watches, but they rarely have the kind of watches that I would like. One of the older early 2000s, Roger Dubuis or Daniel Roth, or even Gerald Genta, or certain pre-2009 Patek Philippe's. But on the other hand, if you go to something like Christie's or Phillips or Sotheby's, those are sort of the big three. You can find some really great exotic watches. Unfortunately, though, you got some other people with serious money bidding against you, and unless you find something that nobody else recognizes, or at least they're not willing to bid on, they can get very expensive. Auctions are sort of a two-edged sword, I think, on that. Great place to sell your watch, so I'll say that. Anyway, guys, thanks again. If you're around 4 o'clock this afternoon, New York time, drop on by.